public policy. It is one thing to feel and empathize, is another thing to carry your feelings and empathy towards an outcome to change public policies, to change systems. And so for me, I said, I need to also reach across communities. Where are the other communities that have been maligned and systems have been used against them? And how do we begin to broaden the conversation and take it away from the concept of partisanship? Reverend Jackson, I'm using him now because he's on here. He used to always talk about there's only one party with two assumptions, or two parties with one reality. And at the end of the day, Black folks were being used in the midst of both of those assumptions, both of those parties, to achieve an outcome that always in line up to the needs and interests of our community. In fact, when you think about political parties, they are nothing more than vehicles for agendas. It's incumbent upon us to put forth the right agenda to drive home the needs and interests that matter to the communities we represent. And in order to do that, you have to build alliances. You have to understand the plight of other communities, but you also have to understand that this is a game of chess, not checkers. And reaching out and talking to other people and aligning your emotional empathy with the reality of what power actually look like. It is a beautiful thing to see what's taking place across the country with the protesters. It is not just protesters of one community, it's everybody. It's the diversity of America. But we have to also begin to march those protests towards power, and power is at the ballot box. Unfortunately, people like to say, well, it's not all about elections. Yes, it is, and it isn't. It's not all about election if you think that at the end of the day, the election is going to be the outcome that you're looking for. But it is about election if the outcome you're looking for is about public policy, which much of this country is driven by both public and private policy. And so for us as African Americans, we really have to understand the nature of power in this democracy and separate out the difference between what a democracy is compared to what is capitalism. Because when democracy is strong, that means we are engaged in it, we're participating, we're advancing our agenda, what's important to our community collectively and individually, and is strong, you hold capital in check. But when democracy is weak and African American votes is supplanted or is submerged and unable to evolve into the voices that it should be, capital exploit people. Capital demean people. Capital figure out ways on how to develop a mass incarceration system that make billionaires out of nowhere, while at the exact same time give lip service to the problem of mass incarceration and blame those who are incarcerated for being victims. Those individuals such as Tukey Smith, who was a genius by one measurement, but illiterate by another measurement, was victimized by a school system that simply penalized him, victimized him because of the zip code he grew up in. Penalize people just because you are born into an area, therefore you lack the access to healthcare. Penalize people as a result of where you're born with asthma. Asthma is not naturally developed. Asthma is environment because of the lead paint in walls, the chemicals that's being emitted. All of that is about public policy. You change public policy by policymakers who are sitting in the seat. And you change that by exercising that currency we call the vote. Our collective currency is the power in this democracy. And so reaching across communities to understand how can we collectively leverage our currency, reaching within our community to make sure we maximize our currency, understanding the platform and history we're standing on so we don't repeat it. Today we are at a juncture. And that juncture is almost like using a historical analogy of standing at the Edmund Pettus Bridge. John Lewis was in the midst of trying to take that march, and he was stopped on that bridge and beat. Today we stand there. The question we have for America, are we going to march forward and change the current political environment so that the public policies really reflect the values that we would like to be governed by? Or are we going to retreat? Are we going to use this moment of protest and say, we told them, we shouted, we lied, we gathered, and now what? And so as we look at the arc of history, we have to learn from history and understand that even our most successful efforts, we had to build coalitions. Even some of our most prolific speakers, they understood the nature of reaching across communities. I would love when Stokely Carmichael would come to campus and he would give a speech and then sit with us for hours. And he would just go back and forth. And for me, it gave me a world view because he was living on the continent of Africa. And once a year, he would come to the States and give speeches. And I would listen and listen. And the amount of love for community he would display was amazing. And one of the things he will always say, whatever you do, organize, organize, organize. Get away from the titles of what organization you're part of, but make sure you organize it, because when it's time to stand up to protect the community, you need to be able to be called on and operate. Yes. And he understood the arc of history. We'll sit there and you had other individuals who would come on campus and talk about that. And for me, I began to carry that forward, because for us to move forward from this moment, it's a great juncture. It's a great opportunity. We can actually do something that we have not done in this country in a long time, is truly address the question of structural racism. Begin to advance the opportunity for there be a trueness to that Constitution that all men and women are entitled to certain inalienable rights. Or we can retreat right at the foot of the bridge and do nothing. Recognize this moment, just like we recognized the moment Trayvon Martin was killed, just like we recognized the moment of Ferguson, just like we recognized the moment of Eric Gardner, or we can actually make something out of this. 8 minutes and 46 seconds, we witnessed a murder in broad daylight. 11 camera angles, people watched. Are we gonna allow people to politicize this moment so they can cannibalize the opportunity? Or can we begin to build relationships within the Black community and outside of the Black community to try to put forth a public policy scheme that reflect a value system that we can overcome the structural racism that has plagued us for decades? Final point. W.E.B. Du Bois was one of the founders of the NAACP. And he talked about the issue of the 21st century will be the issue of race. We have never dealt with race. We've never addressed race. We try to make the